Labor has come good on its promise to ban live sheep exports. They've announced legislation this weekend that will shut the industry down from May 1, 2028. But don't worry, they say the upcoming budget will reportedly include $107 million spread over a 5-year period to help farmers move out of the industry. You've got the West Australian government, which is of course a Labor government, is steadfastly opposed to this, and you can understand why. There are countries in the world that don't want to take packaged meat from us, and we decide that we're going to be the moral arbiters of the world and say, well, you can't possibly have the live sheep. But if we're not producing those live sheep, and of course we have all sorts of rules and regulations about animal cruelty and safety in this country, where do they think the live sheep that the other countries are going to procure will come from, and what are the standards like in those countries? I mean, you know, I get the greenies and the animal activists might have an issue with live exports, but surely the lesser of the two evils is that they come from a country with pretty stringent standards like Australia.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to shut down the live export trade. There's countries in the Middle East who have a huge demand for it because they want the live animals so that they can prepare halal meat, which
what Kara's trying to say is the Greens are Islamophobic because they're trying to deny Muslims in the US
It is
eating food in a culturally appropriate way.
It's kind of ironic. It is kind of ironic. Maybe we should make that point more clearly to them because it is upsetting our Middle Eastern
want them to kill the Jews,
partners.
won't let them eat.
Exactly.
You know?
What can you do? So you're right, Caleb. It means that other countries that don't have the safeguards that we do will be the ones that are their preferred partners, and more sheep will die in the process. And it is tragic. I'm an animal lover, but it is absolutely tragic to see those instances where animals are dying on ships. But a lot has changed and improved since that awful tragedy in 2018.
But also remember the Gillard government's instantaneous response to turn off an industry that resulted in them, you know, years later, High Court, all the rest of it, right? Was because they were reacting to what they saw on television, remember, which was animal rights footage from places that Australia's not in charge of, which is, you know, again, the way animals were being slaughtered, particularly in Indonesia. But what I find, again, I for some reason can only look at it through one filter, which is, geez, isn't it convenient that we learnt this weekend about the changing to live exports when last week the Prime Minister was running around Beef Week pretending he was the lover of all farmers. So, of course, you put that announcement over here so you can get this one out there. And, yes, there's a tapering off, and lefties don't like even how long the tapering off is, but what a surprise each way up.
Can I just make one point? This is meant to happen by 2028.
Yep.
Let's just hope and pray that Labor aren't in by then. That's the hope and prayer. But I think a huge thing that we need to address here as well is the mental health aspect that this will have on our farmers.
Correct. I was sure you were going to say sheep then. But,
No,
well,
but
they're better off here.
The sheep, I think,
don't use them as props. Talk to them as people.
This, like, being a farmer myself, I don't do live exports or anything like that. But I can see how families and farmers build their entire life off something like this, and then to basically say you have 4 years to figure out what you're going to do. That's a huge, and I'm pretty sure if you look at statistics, farmers have some of the highest suicide rates in our country as well. So I'm scared for them. I'm scared for what this is going to do to our economy. Meat is such a huge part of our economy in our country. But it just seems very similar to what we're seeing in Europe, which is lots of government involvement in farming. And if you have a look at the Netherlands, Germany, France, what's happening to farms over there. I'm not going to get into it, it's too long, but if you just look that up, and not what the mainstream are telling you, but if you actually look at the policies that they're putting on farms over there, to the point where they can't run and they have to sell their whole farms and the government basically purchases them. This is headed in that direction where there's too much government overreach on our farms, and I think it's going to be pretty scary if we don't get a hold of it and we allow them to run.
I think, though, this is obviously share concerns for our farmers and their economic and mental well-being. But I think this is actually one of those really specific issues. Though this is not the farm industry generally, it's not the meat industry generally. The vast majority of our meat exports are not live exports. This is something that is very Western Australian. I think it's confined entirely.
It is very Western.
Yet another middle finger to Western Australia from Labor.
That's well, hopefully, you know.
The WA Premier's blowing up about
That's right.
it.
No, I know. And I think, and I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think that this could actually have a really seismic impact on the consumption in those countries, because from memory, Australia and the northwestern point of Western Australia in particular is the only place where you can actually viably export these live animals so that they get to countries in the Middle East in time. Obviously, Indonesia is an easier concern, and that's where the footage came out of. And so it could potentially have quite a seismic impact on the eating habits of people in the Middle East. I don't know if there are any other farming countries that they can easily get them from that are just across the sea. I don't think, I'm not sure.
That's the other way they can justify it, is it's good for carbon emissions because it's fewer people eating meat, etc., etc.
They can eat bugs instead.
Exactly. Our poor friends in the Middle East, they should be eating bugs, but we get to eat the prime rib and all sorts of stuff over here.